Welcome, friends, enemies, and everyone in between, to my channel, The Masked Mormon. I am, in fact, The Masked Mormon.
Why you wearing a mask? Were you burned by acid or something like that?
Oh no, it's just they're terribly comfortable. I think everyone will be wearing them in the future.
If you are returning, welcome back. But if this is your first time here, I am a Mormon who used to believe in the truth claims of the Mormon Church. I did it all. I was baptized, I went on a mission, I went to BYU, I was married in the temple, and all the rest of it. I truly believed in the claims of Mormonism. Now, I explore some of the implications of Mormon theology, culture, and some of my own personal experiences, and talk about it on the internet with you fine viewers. I say this because my Mormon cred, as it were, is often questioned by believers who leave comments. I spent over 2 decades as a believing member. I have all the signs and tokens that enable me to walk back into the presence of the Father, passing the angels who stand as sentinels, and gain eternal exaltation. If you haven't already, if you like what I do, please like and subscribe. Also, if there is something that you would like me to talk about, leave it in the comments. One of the purposes of this channel is to explore the implications of Mormon theology. As I was reflecting on this, I started thinking about what would have to be true if Mormonism was true. Mormonism makes testable claims. A chief characteristic of the scientific method is that any claim needs to be testable. A theory, by definition, is backed up by evidence and tons of data. It is something that is testable. It is something that makes predictions. If those predictions aren't supported by the data, then you have to go back to the drawing board. The theory of gravity is a great example. Isaac Newton and others made observations of the natural world and developed mathematical models that were able to be used to predict things like eclipses, planetary positions, and even the existence of Neptune. Later, that theory was used to plot the course of various spacecraft through the solar system. The theory has explanatory power and was used to make predictions that were then verified by observation. The same things are true of germ theory, thermodynamics, evolution by natural selection, general relativity, quantum mechanics, the Big Bang, plate tectonics, and many more. Any claim that is made about the natural world should be backed up by evidence. The religions, Mormonism included, usually deal in the realm of the unfalsifiable, claims that cannot be proven one way or the other. If it's unfalsifiable, there's really no experiment that can be done to prove it false. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, but there's no way to prove it. A great example in the scientific world is string theory. String theory tries to marry gravity and the other 3 fundamental forces, among other things. However, there's currently no way to test the claims of string theory, so it's unfalsifiable. Religious claims are also in the realm of the unfalsifiable, and that's not what I'm tackling today. I'm not going to be exploring the claims of the existence of God or of other supernatural claims associated with a God belief. Mormonism, like most of the other religions, presupposes the existence of God. And I'm not getting into that today. Maybe another time. Mormonism also claims to be a Christian religion, and I'm not about to question that. Other Christian religions may try to gatekeep Mormonism, but I'm not going to be doing that. But I'm also not going to be delving into the divinity of Jesus, because again, that doesn't really distinguish Mormonism from the other Christianities. Sectarian protests to the contrary aside. No, Mormonism makes certain claims that, if they were true, the world would look a certain way. Like, if I were to say something, ridiculous, like, my belief system says that the sky is green. If my belief system is right, you would expect to be able to go outside and see a green sky. This belief says something about how the world would look if my belief were right. If, however, there's information contrary to that claim, it's pretty safe to say that my belief is incorrect. Past and present leaders in Mormonism, in their official capacity as representatives of Jesus Christ, have made claims that, if true, would have implications on how the world would look and operate. But before I go any further, I should clarify what truth is. I think there are two kinds of truth. The first is personal truth. This type is subjective and varies from person to person. For me, I feel that chocolate is one of the greatest substances on the earth. I love it. But I recognize that this isn't universal. Some people hate it or are otherwise indifferent to it. Personal truth is where religious convictions reside. The Hindu, the Muslim, the Christian, etc., each have a personal truth that is important to them and partially defines who they are. This is also where a person's gods reside. Because of their subjective nature, these are unfalsifiable truths. I cannot prove that I love my wife, the mass mistress. Objective truth, on the other hand, is capital T truth. These are truths that can be backed up by evidence and data. This is the type of truth that I am talking about. If someone tries to mingle personal truth with objective truth, things can start to go sideways. Personal truths can start to step on the toes of what objectively is. If a person confuses personal truth with objective truth, they start to live a life of delusion. Now, this video isn't exhaustive and is meant to kind of give a brief overview. I will likely go into more detail on some of these topics in other videos. But if there is something you would like me to cover specifically, let me know down in the comments. So with that groundwork laid, what does the world look like if Mormonism is objectively true? Mormonism holds the Old and New Testaments in its canonized scripture, and has held the stories that they tell as literally historically factual. Many of the claims of Mormonism rely on these stories to be historical. This isn't much different than how evangelical Christianity views the Bible. However, hundreds of years of biblical scholarship has shown that these stories were adapted from earlier stories or used to build a foundational myth of the Hebrew people, or made up long after the fact to help a people that were constantly under the heel of various aggressive empires and help them deal with their reality. Kind of a way to deal with the trauma of being conquered. Now, some of those stories include creation and the age of the earth. Mormonism demands a young earth, not one that is billions of years old. Specifically, in Doctrine and Covenants 77, Joseph Smith is having a question and answer session with Jesus. And verse 6 tells us that the earth is just 6,000 years old. It will be 7,000 years old at the end of the millennium, after Jesus comes again. Some will claim that only the earth is this age. Others will claim that the universe itself is this age. But if this is really the case, then things like the speed of light would vary, as would other universal constants, which, if they were different than their current values, things like chemistry and nuclear reactions would be impossible, meaning that stars and life itself would not exist. Suddenly, the world becomes unpredictable. Ultimately, magic has to be involved to explain things that we see. The long progression of life on this planet would be wiped away. This means that genetics and evolution fall apart. Dinosaurs suddenly have to have never existed. But what's more, this ignores the humans that lived before this date. Wine and cheese were both invented by humans before these dates. On a related note, the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve are central to Mormon doctrine. The temple ceremony revolves around a retelling of this story. Church leaders have taught that the fall of man was a necessity to justify the atonement of Jesus, and also that the Garden of Eden itself was located in Missouri, in Jackson County, Missouri to be exact. The problems with this are that the origins of humankind are understood pretty well, from several strings of independent evidence. Paleontology, archaeology, genetics all point to the same conclusion, that humanity arose in Africa and spread over the globe over the course of tens of thousands of years. I shared my own genetic lineage in an earlier video, all the way back to Africa. If humanity started with only 2 individuals, the problems associated with incest would have driven us to extinction within 3 or 4 generations. We never would have survived to the next most famous Bible story, Noah's flood. This event was considered factual for generations. I remember being taught that it was a real event in the 1990s and early 2000s. It was explained that the earth needed to be baptized before it was glorified in the millennium. A global flood has several implications that I will explore more fully in another video. But to keep it brief, an immense amount of water, about 2.5 times the water that currently exists on the earth, let that sink in. For the flood to have happened, there would have to be 2.5 times more water than currently exists on the earth. And that has to come from somewhere and cover the earth, and then it has to go somewhere. 2.5 times the water that's currently on the earth. Come from somewhere and go somewhere. The same incest problems exists as with Adam and Eve, with Noah and his family, and with all the animals. Also, somehow, all the animals have to migrate to the ark and then back again. How did the kangaroos get to Australia? The penguins to Antarctica? The llamas to South America? Fish, insects, trees, etc. would have gone extinct. Where did all the poop on the ark go? What did everything eat? So no, the Great Flood could not have happened. Then, not long after the flood, the people of the earth tried to build a big tower to heaven, and God, in turn, confused all their languages. If you recall the Tower of Babel story. These languages were confounded so that they would scatter. This story is essential for the Book of Mormon, because in the Book of Ether, within the Book of Mormon, it is set during this event. All languages would have to be traceable to this event and location, and that's just not how language works. Linguists have been able to trace the paths of language over thousands of years. This leads us into some of the claims of the Book of Mormon itself. The Book of Mormon claims that the Old Testament was compiled in its current form as early as 600 BC, long before it actually existed. On top of that, it makes the claim that this compiled record was engraved on metal plates, when no one recorded books in this fashion. In fact, to think about it, no one recorded books. The codex wasn't invented until hundreds of years later. It is true that there are examples of plates with writing on them from the ancient world. However, these writings are very brief because metal is hard to write on and expensive, and not many people were literate. The amount of writing that is described in the Book of Mormon demands a level of literacy that just didn't exist in the ancient Americas. Mormonism Live, a couple weeks ago, did a great episode in talking about the literacy that's suggested in the Book of Mormon and how it just didn't exist at the time. There are also writings in the Book of Mormon that should not be there because the words were not written yet. Like the writings of the Book of Isaiah after chapter 39. The Book of Mormon claims that the people of the Americas are descended from the Middle East. Genetic evidence has long since refuted this claim. Modern apologetics has tried to obfuscate this point by trying to make it seem like we don't really know or have enough evidence. But that's frankly a lie. Not only does the Book of Mormon claim that the Native Americans originate from Jerusalem, but they were also more technologically advanced than any of the other people in the Americas. They practiced advanced metalworking that would have defined the technology and culture long after the Nephite destruction. On top of that, the use of horses would have been used by all of the successive civilizations. Once horses were reintroduced to the Americas during the European conquest, the people adopted horse riding because it was such a huge advantage. Over the centuries, after the introduction of European horses, native nations developed sophisticated culture revolving around the horse. This is something that just didn't exist before the Spanish came. The Book of Mormon goes into a great amount of detail describing a system of coinage. Money, at least in the sense that it was known in Europe, wasn't used by the native nations. You will find coins from the Roman Empire littered all over Europe. If coins were used by the Book of Mormon people, you would similarly expect to see them all over the Americas, wherever these people were. The Roman Empire existed around the same time as the height of the Nephite and Lamanite civilizations. So, someone somewhere in the Americas should have stumbled on some of the coins by now. The Book of Mormon also claims that the Nephites followed the law of Moses. In other words, they observed ancient Jewish holy days, festivals, and religious rites. Instead, the Book of Mormon describes a Christianized people who observe a 19th century version of Christianity. There's no mention of the Passover feast, or Yom Kippur, or Sabbath years, or any of the other holy days that are described in the Old Testament. Speaking of feasts, there is a lot of flora and fauna described in the Book of Mormon that shouldn't be there, and a lack of other flora and fauna that should be. For instance, where is the chocolate? Potatoes? Tomatoes? Maize? Llamas? Instead, there are European animals and plants appearing where they should not. The Book of Mormon is very explicit that sin causes people's skin to turn black, as a sign of God's cursing and to make them undesirable to the righteous. If people repent, then it is taught that their skin then starts to lighten. The Book of Mormon also describes various geologic events and astronomical anomalies that occurred about 2,000-ish years ago. On the day Jesus was born in Jerusalem, a sign that the Nephites would see was that the sun would go down and it wouldn't get dark. Then, after Jesus' death, there was a huge earthquake and darkness for several days. There would be signs of this geologic destruction that would be traced back to the time in question. Additionally, other civilizations would have seen and recorded the celestial events. These were not localized events. The Book of Mormon tells us that the events after the death of Jesus changed the face of the entire land. Several cities were buried in the earth or sunk into the ocean. Things like that leave signs that scream out to geologists. Also, that much geologic movement is sure to cause tsunamis that would spread destruction far and wide. Other civilizations would have been affected by these events. They would have seen and recorded an event where it didn't get dark after the sunset. That's not really something you forget about or don't write about. Or they would have been affected by the after effects of the geologic destruction. Some examples of some of these civilizations that might have seen some of these things are the Han Dynasty in China, the Shunga Empire in India, and the early Mayan Empire in Mexico. So that's enough with the ancient claims that would change the face and very nature of the world we live in. Let's move on to the modern era. One of the foundational claims of Mormonism is that God speaks to prophets, just like in the Old Testament and New Testaments. And with the heavens now open, there had been a restoration of truths that had been lost, specifically the saving ordinances of the temple that allow people to be exalted and become gods themselves. Joseph Smith made claims of visitations from angels, Jesus, and even God himself. If the creator of the universe is speaking through prophets, it should be pretty obvious, and the organization that this prophet is the head of would be hard to ignore. The power of a universal God should emanate from it. Instead, we seem to see a God that is more concerned with his representative banging as many women as he can. This God is also worryingly concerned with this representative having inappropriate relationships with children. This God is concerned about his founders jockeying for power with backdated prophecies and angelic visitations of messengers bringing special magical powers. Priesthood. This God is also more concerned about hiding all the signs of his presence, making everything that his prophetic representative does indistinguishable from fraud. Yet, there is no shortage of church leadership telling the membership that they talk to Jesus directly. It is understood by the membership that the president of the church and the Quorum of the 12 have regular meetings with Jesus Christ. However, during the Reed-Smoot hearings that occurred between 1904 and 1907, the president of the church himself, Joseph F. Smith, testified before Congress. He was asked if he had received any revelations from God, and he said that he hadn't. He said, quote, "None whatsoever," unquote. Now, it could be that he was lying. But what is the job of a prophet? It is to be a representative of God and to be his messenger. There also does happen to be this pesky commandment that the church claims to honor about bearing false witness. The church ultimately talks out of both sides of its mouth. It wants the members to think that they have special access to God, but when pressed, they will deflect, deny, or obfuscate with carefully worded statements. They will say something along the lines of what Bruce R. McConkie said during his last General Conference address. He said, quote, "I am one of his witnesses, and in a coming day I shall feel the nail marks in his hands and on his feet, and I shall wet his feet with my tears. But I shall not know any better than I know now that he is God's almighty Son, that he is our Savior and Redeemer, and that salvation comes in and through his atoning blood and in no other way." Unquote. The leaders will say similar things, and the membership, with stars in their eyes, will think that this means that they are in face-to-face contact with Jesus. They will also claim to have experiences that are too sacred to share, which is again interpreted as personal visitations. However, the job of a prophet and apostle is to bear witness of Christ. They do not have the same expectations of privacy as other members. If their experiences are too sacred to share, what is the point of having a prophet or apostle? When the president and quorum of the 12 are sustained every 6 months, they are sustained as prophets, seers, and revelators. However, they don't seem to prophesy, reveal, or see anything. They are always about a generation or two behind on things that they should be at the forefront on. Civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, human rights in general. Combating poverty, hunger, homelessness, all the things that seem to be low priorities of Jesus' representatives. The revelations that we do have seem to focus on things that don't really make sense. God seems to be strangely fixated on people paying 10% of their income in tithing. The word of wisdom seems to strangely fit into the views of the temperance movement of the 19th century. Instead of telling people that they need to boil their water to purify it from the invisible organisms that cause many of the sicknesses that have ravaged humanity for millennia, they are told to avoid hot drinks. Prophets are said to be able to be translators. Joseph translated records all over the place. And if he really were a translator, his products should be able to stand up to scrutiny. Joseph Smith claimed to translate Egyptian papyrus scrolls. The remnants that we still have should match his translations in the Book of Abraham. Yet, they do not. The leadership is far behind on any sort of biblical scholarship. The LDS version of the Bible should be the definitive version that is used by other scholars to compare to. Instead, the church is stuck on the King James Version, which is out of date by centuries. If the Book of Mormon is for our day, it would have contained things that are important in our day and age. The most correct book on earth is strangely silent on some of the most important issues of our day. The aforementioned civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, international relationships, etc. The Book of Mormon is obviously written with 19th century concerns in mind. It is, just frankly, out of date. Finally, the church claims to hold priesthood authority. Besides the authority to run God's church, one of the claims that the missionaries will teach investigators is that this is the same power that Jesus used to heal the sick, and this power is present in the church. By the laying on of hands, it is claimed that miraculous healings occur in the church. There is no lack of people who, when they feel unwell, will ask for a priesthood blessing. And they will get better. However, these illnesses are generally self-limiting. A cold or a broken bone, etc. People will generally get better whether or not they have a priesthood blessing. However, the big things seem to be ignored. Cancer, kidney failure, heart attacks, genetic disorders, amputations, these things don't seem to be able to be reversed with priesthood blessings. If they did, Utah and Idaho hospitals would have better health outcomes than anywhere else in the world. People would flock to these places. Doctors and priesthood holders would walk down the halls of these hospitals. The blind would see, cancer would be healed, amputated limbs would regenerate. We are taught that if you have sufficient faith, you will be healed. However, we now get messages from the top leadership asking if instead we have faith not to be healed. All of the stories about people receiving priesthood blessings in general conference seem to end in that person dying. Not once does someone take up their bed and walk. It seems that if you receive a priesthood blessing, you will die. The world that Mormonism tries to sell us is one with a young earth, one where scientific understanding is contrary to the claims in the holy books. This is a world that is unpredictable, a world where magic exists, a world that is capricious, it's unreliable. I know I glossed over a lot of things. I tried to keep things top level for now, but that is because for Mormonism to be true, the universe would look a lot different than it does in the light of overwhelming evidence against its truth claims. But that is because for Mormonism to be true, the universe, not just the world, the entire universe, would look a lot different than it does. In the light of overwhelming evidence against its truth claims, the church is trying to soften its views and its claims. It has apologists muddying the waters, trying to give explanations or redefinitions to the claims. Apologists try to claim that we really don't know what in fact we do know about this world. Apologetic answers try to let believers know that at least someone has thought about an issue. All the members really want to know is that there are answers, not if those answers are right or if they hold up to scrutiny. Because many of the truth claims of the Mormon Church are tied to the physical world. When the physical claims are dismantled, the faith of the members ultimately falls apart. Or they have to maintain a delusion, living in a world that doesn't actually exist. To survive, the church is going to have to let go of all its objective truth claims. All objective evidence refutes the church. But what are your thoughts? What else must be true for Mormonism to be true? Let me know down in the comments. And if you would, please like and subscribe and share. And I'll see you in the next video.